The Enchanted Deer from the Lilac Fairy Book. A young man was walking one day in iron, leading a stout cart horse by the bridle. He was thinking of his mother and how poor they were since his father, who was a fisherman, had been drowned at sea, and wondering what he should do to earn a living for them both. Suddenly a hand was laid on his shoulder, and a voice said to him, "Will you sell me your horse, son of the fisherman?" And looking up, he beheld a man standing in the road with a gun in his hand, a falcon on his shoulder, and a dog by his side. "What will you give me for my horse?" asked the youth. "Will you give me your gun, your dog, and your falcon?" "I will give them," answered the man, and he took the horse. But the youth took the gun, and the dog, and the falcon, and he went home with them. But when his mother heard what he had done, she was very angry, and beat him with a stick, which she had in her hand. "I will teach you to sell my property," she said. But her arm was quite tired, but Ian, her son, answered for nothing, and went off to his bed, for he was very sore. That night he arose softly and left the house, carrying the gun with him. "I will not stay here to be beaten," he thought. And he walked, and he walked, and he walked, till it was day again, and he was hungry and looked about him to see if he could get anything to eat. Not very far off was a farmhouse, so he went there and knocked on the door, and the farmer and his wife begged him to come in and share their breakfast. "Ah, you have a gun," said the farmer to the young man, who placed it in the corner. "That is well, for a deer comes every evening to eat all my corn, and I cannot catch it. It is fortunate that you were sent to me." "I will gladly remain and shoot the deer for you," replied the youth, and that night he hid himself and watched till the deer came to the cornfield. Then he lifted his gun to his shoulder and was going to pull the trigger when, behold, instead of a deer, a woman with long black hair was standing there. At the sight, his gun almost dropped from his hand in surprise. But as he looked, there was a deer eating the corn again, and thrice this happened till the deer ran away over the moor, and the young man after her. On they went, on and on and on, until they reached a cottage which was thatched with heather. With a bound the deer sprang on the roof, and lay down where none could see her. But as she did, she so called out, "Go in, fisher's son, eat and drink while you may." So he entered and found food and wine on the table, but no man, for the house belonged to some robbers who were still away at their wicked business. After Ian, the fisherson, had eaten all he wanted, he hid himself behind a great cask, and very soon he heard a noise, as of men coming through the heather, and the small twigs snapping under their feet. From his dark corner he could see into the room, and he counted 24 of them, all big, cross-looking men. "Someone has been eating our dinner," they cried, "and there was hardly enough for ourselves." "It is a man who is lying under the cask," answered the leader. "Go and kill him, and then come and eat your food and sleep, for we must be off to bedtimes in the morning." So 4 of them killed the fisher's son and left him. And then they went to bed. By sunrise they were all out of the house, for they had far to go. And when they disappeared, the deer came off the roof to where the dead man lay, and she shook her head over him, and wax fell from her ear, and he jumped up as well as ever. "Trust me and eat as you did before, and no harm shall happen to you," said she. So Ian ate and drank, and fell sound asleep under the cask. In the evening the robbers arrived very tired and crosser than they had ever been before the day before, for their luck had turned, and they had brought back scarcely anything. "Someone has eaten our dinner again," they cried. "That's a man under the barrel," answered the captain. "Let 4 of you go and kill him." But first slay the other four who pretended to kill him last night, and didn't because he is still alive. Then Ian was killed a second time, and after the rest of the robbers had eaten, they lay down and slept till morning. And no sooner were their faces touched with the sun's rays that they were up and off. Then the deer entered and dropped the healing wax on the dead man. But this time he did not mind what befell him. So sure was he that the deer would take care of him. And in the evening that which happened before happened again. The four robbers were put to death, and also the fisher's son. But because there was no food left for them to eat, they were nearly mad with rage, and began to quarrel. From quarreling they went to fighting, and they fought so hard that by and by they were all stretched on the floor dead. Then the deer entered, and the fisher's son was restored to life. And bidding him to follow her, she ran on to a little white cottage where dwelt an old woman and her son, who was thin and dark. "Here I must leave you," said the deer, "but tomorrow meet me at midday in the churchyard that is yonder." And jumping across the stream, she vanished into the woods. The next day he set out for the church, but the old woman of the cottage had gone before him, and had stuck an enchanted stick called the Spike of Hurt in a crack of the floor, so that he would brush against it as he stepped across the threshold. Suddenly he felt so sleepy that he could not stand up, and throwing himself down on the ground he sank into a deep slumber, not knowing that the dark lad was watching him. Nothing could waken him, not even the sound of the sweetest music, nor the touch of a lady who bent over him. A sad look came on her face, as she saw it was of no use, and at last she gave it up, and lifting his arm, wrote her name across the side. The daughter of the king of the town under the waves. "I will come tomorrow," she whispered, though he could not hear her, and she went sorrowfully away. And then he awoke, and the dark lad told him what had befallen him, and he was very grieved. But the dark lad did not tell him of the name that was written underneath his arm. And the following morning the fisher's son again went to the church, determined that he would not go to sleep, whatever happened. But in his hurry to enter he touched his hand on the Spike of Hurt, and sank down where he stood, wrapped in slumber. A second time the air was filled with music, and the lady came in, stepping softly. But though she laid his head on her knee and combed his hair with a golden comb, his eyes did not open. Then she burst into tears, and placing a beautifully wrought box in his pocket, she went on her way. The next day the same thing befell the fisher's son, and this time the lady wept more bitterly than before, for she said it was the last chance, and she would never be allowed to come any more, for home she must go. As soon as the lady had departed, the fisher's son awoke, and the dark lad told him of her visit, and how he would never see her as long as he lived. At this the fisher's son felt the cold creeping up in his heart, yet he knew the fault had been that his sleep had overtaken him. "I will search the whole world through until I find her," cried he, and the dark lad laughed as he heard him. But the fisher's son took no heed, and off he went, following the sun day after day, till his shoes were in holes and his feet were sore from the journey. And naught did he see but birds that make their nests in trees, not so much a goat or a rabbit. On and on he went, until he suddenly came upon a little house, with a woman standing outside it. "Oh, hail, fisher's son," she said. "I know what you are seeking. Enter and rest and eat, and tomorrow I will give you what help I can, and send you on your way." Gladly did Ian the fisher's son accept the offer, And all that day he rested, and the woman gave him ointments to put on his feet, which healed his sores. At daybreak he got up, ready to be gone, and the woman bade him farewell, saying, "I have a sister who dwells on the road which you must travel. It is a long road, and it will take you a year and a day to reach it. But put on these brown shoes with holes all over them, and you will be there before you know it. Then shake them off and turn the toes to the known, and at their heels to the unknown, and they will come home themselves." The fisher's son did what the woman told him, and everything happened just as she had said. But at parting, the second sister said to him she gave him another pair of shoes. "Go to my third sister, for she is a son who is a keeper of the birds of the air, and sends them to sleep when night comes. He is very wise, and perhaps he can help you." Then the young man thanked her, and went to the third sister. The third sister was very kind, but had no counsel to give him. So he ate and drank and waited until her son came home, after he had sent all the birds to sleep. He thought a long while after his mother had told him the young man's story, and at last he said that he was hungry, and the cow must be killed, as he wanted some supper. So the cow was killed and the meat cooked, and a bag made of its red skin. "Now, get into the bag," bade the son, and the young man got in and took his gun with him. But the dog and the falcon he left outside. The keeper of the birds drew the string at the top of the bag and left it to finish his supper. When in flew an eagle through the open door and picked up the bag in her claws and carried it through the air to an island. There was nothing to eat on the island, and the fisher's son thought that he would die of food, when he remembered the box that the little lady had put in his pocket. He opened the lid, and 3 tiny birds flew out, and flapping their wings, they asked, "Headmaster, is there anything we can do for you?" "Bear me to the kingdom of the king under the waves," he answered. And one little bird flew on his head, and the others perched on either of his shoulders. And he shut his eyes, and in a moment there he was in the country under the sea. Then the birds flew away, and the young man looked about him, his heart beating fast at the thought that here dwelt the lady to whom he sought all over the world. He walked on through the streets, and presently he reached the house of a weaver who was standing at his door, resting from his work. "Ah, you're a stranger here, that's plain," said the weaver. "But come in, I will give you food and drink." The young man was glad, for he knew not where to go, and they sat and talked till it grew late. "Stay with me, I pray, for I love company and am lonely," observed the weaver at last. And he pointed to a bed in the corner, where the fisher's son threw himself and slept till dawn. "There's to be a horse race today in town," remarked the weaver, "and the winner is to have the king's daughter to wife." The young man trembled with excitement at the news, and his voice shook as he answered, "That will be a prize indeed. I should like to see that race." "Oh, that is quite easy. Anyone can go," replied the weaver. "I would take you myself, but I have promised to weave this cloth for the king." "That is a pity," returned the young man politely, but in his heart he rejoiced, for he wished to be alone. Leaving the house, he entered a grove of trees which stood behind, and took the box from his pocket. He raised the lid, and out flew the 3 little birds. "Headmaster, what shall we do for thee?" they said. And he answered, "Bring me the finest horse that was ever seen, and the grandest dress, glass shoes." "Why glass shoes?" "They're here, master," said the birds, and so they were, and never had the young man seen anything so splendid. Mounting the horse, he rode onto the ground where the horses were assembling for the great race, and he took his place among them. Many good beasts were there which had won many races, but the horse of the fisher's son left them all behind, and he was first at the winning post. The king's daughter waited for him in vain to claim his prize, for he went back to the wood and got off his horse and put on his old clothes, and bade the box some gold in his pockets. After that he went to the weaver's house and told him that the gold he had been given was by the man who won the race, and that the weaver might have it for his kindness in return. Now, as nobody had appeared to demand the hand of the princess, the king ordered another race to be run, and the fisher's son rode into the field more splendidly dressed than he has before, and easily distanced himself from everyone else again. But again he left the prize unclaimed, and so it happened on the third day, when it seemed as if all the people in the kingdom were gathered to see the race, for they were all filled with curiosity to know who the winner would be. "If he will not come on his own free will, he must be brought," said the king, and the messengers who had seen the face of the victor were sent to seek him in every street of the town. This took many days, and when at last they found the young man in the weaver's cottage, he was so dirty and ugly and had such a strange appearance that they declared he could not be the winner they had seen and had been searching for, but a wicked robber who had murdered ever so many people and had always managed to escape. "Yes, it must be the robber," said the king, when the fisher's son was led into his presence. "Build a gallows at once, and hang him in the sight of all my subjects, that they may behold him suffer the punishment of his crimes." So the gallows was built upon a high platform, and the fisher's son mounted the steps up to it, and turned at the top to make a speech, as was expected of every doomed man, innocent or guilty. As he spoke, he happened to raise his arm, and the king's daughter, who was there at her father's side, saw the name which she had written under it. With a shriek she sprang from her seat, and the eyes of the spectators were turned towards her. "Stop! Stop!" she cried, hardly knowing what she said. "If that man is hanged, there is not a soul in the kingdom that shall die also." And running up to where her father's son was, the fisher's son was standing, she took him by the hand, saying, "Father, this is no robber or murderer, but the victor in the 3 races, and he loosed the spells that were laid upon me." But then, without waiting a reply, she conducted him to the palace, and bathed him in a marble bath, and all the dirt that the fairies had put upon him disappeared like magic. And when he had dressed himself in the fine garments the princess had sent him, he looked a match for any king's daughter in Erin. They went down into the great hall where she was awaiting him, and they had much to tell each other, but little time to tell it in. For the king, her father, and the princes who were visiting him, and all the people of the kingdom were still in their places, expecting her return. "How did you find me out?" she whispered as they went down the passage. "The birds in the box told me," answered he, but he could say no more. As they stepped out into the open space that was crowded with people, the princes stopped. "O kings," she said, turning towards him, "if one of you were killed today, the rest would fly. This man put his trust in me, and had his head cut off 3 times. Because he has done this, I will marry him rather than one of you, who have come hither to wed me. For many kings have sought to free me from spells, but none could do it save for Ian, the fisher's son."